Hey, Susan.
Hey, Michael.
It's a delight to have you as part of this The Future is Calling Us to Greatness series. Your work with communicating climate science has been just such an inspiration to both me and to my wife, Connie Barlow, and others we've turned on to. But I'm realizing that, some people may not be yet familiar with you and your work. So could you just take a few minutes and just, don't be bashful. Help us know, who is Susan Joy Hassol? Like, what is your trajectory? How did you get to be where you are now? And what are some of the things that you've accomplished or have done in this field that would be of interest to folks that are participating in this series?
So I'm a climate change communicator. I've been working in this field for a couple of decades, more than a couple of decades. I try to help scientists communicate more effectively and clearly about what we know. And I don't really want to be the voice. I'd rather be the voice coach. And I feel like that's what I do with many in the scientific community. But sometimes I'm called to also speak about climate change and what we know. So I was in Asheville working on the National Climate Assessment. I've worked on all three of the National Climate Assessments. First one in 2000, then in 2009, and now the one in 2014. And I was there in Asheville because the technical support unit for the assessment was based at NOAA's National Climatic Data Center. So I moved there and spent 2 years working on this project. Before that, I was in Boulder, which is just a wonderful city for climate science. I was a visitor at NCAR up on the Mesa there, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I got to work and see every day wonderful scientists like Kevin Trenberth and Jerry Meal and Warren Washington and Jeff Keel, and it was just such a treat to be there. And then before that, I lived in Aspen, Colorado for about 25 years, and Aspen is a wonderful place.
Yeah.
I worked there at the Aspen Global Change Institute, where we did interdisciplinary meetings on climate change science, and I think it was there that even before then, I worked in the energy field, and it became really clear to me that climate change was the issue of our time. And I just wanted to do the most important thing there was to do in the most effective way there was to do it. And for me, that turned out to be communicating about climate change and helping others communicate more effectively about climate change. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do ever since, and especially working in the policy relevant kind of science that's actionable, that answers questions that people have and helps decision makers at all levels figure out what to do about this.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. I mean, that's actually one of the things that I am particularly excited about your work, is both the policy end of it, the policy angle of it, that it's not just science for science sake, but it's basically science for moving us as a species into more right relationship to reality, and communicating the science in ways that help people get it, both emotionally as well as intellectually. And so could you just share just a little bit more about sort of some of the things that you are most proud of, that you have been part of, or co-editor or lead author or whatever, and then get into a little bit about how do you see the science? And people watching this or listening to this series are going to be all over the map. Some have been immersed in the science for a long time, and others have, for whatever reason, not emotionally sort of let it in because it's just too scary, and just everything in between, and others. So help us get who Susan Joy Hassol is just a little bit more, and then basically whatever you're led to say in terms of communicating the science.
Okay. It strikes me that the story of climate change that people need to understand is the world is warming, climate is changing. We are the primary cause of that change, the dominant cause by far of that change. It's already affecting us, where we live, where we work. Our whole society is being affected in enormous ways by climate change. It's not just an environmental issue. Right. This is not about melting at the poles and polar bears, although it's about those things too. This is about us, and this is about our lives and the lives of our children and their children. And we can fix it. We can turn this thing around. We're not going to stop at dead in its tracks, but the choice we face is enormous. It's between a little more warming and some more impacts that we'll still have to adapt to and deal with, or catastrophic warming and a completely different planet. Yes. And so I don't believe that we will continue down the road we're on. I think that to do that to ourselves is just unthinkable. So it's a man-made problem, and it has man-made solutions. We can do this, and not only can we do it, and not only do we have to do it, it's going to be great for us in so many other ways. So as Amory Lovins likes to say, it's not a free lunch, it's a lunch we're paid to eat. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to improve our bottom line, and everything's going to be good. So, even now, if we, cut back on coal burning, if we cut back on burning gasoline in our cars, we immediately have cleaner air. We have a healthier air. We send less kids to the hospital with asthma. We get more fit because we're walking and we're riding our bikes, and that makes us healthier and more resilient. We have more walkable and happy communities where neighbors are getting to know neighbors. There's a million good reasons to do this, all the things that we would need to do to cut emissions. So to me, it doesn't have to be about sacrifice and, enormous lifestyle changes that will, some people might see as very negative. Really, it's a very positive story. Now, if this were just happening to us, if climate change was just, happening, right, the sun was getting hotter or something, that would be a real drag because there'd be essentially nothing we could do but adapt. So in a way, admitting the truth that we are the cause is empowering because we can do something about it. We can turn it around. And that's where we're headed now, is everybody getting on board, people understanding and accepting the science, and then figuring out what are the best, most effective ways forward. Yeah. And so when I talk about the science, I can talk about the science in tremendous detail, but for most people, I think that's not the most important thing to do. Exactly. The radiative properties of these heat-trapping gases, that's not what people really care about. Whether we stabilize at 400 parts per million or 450, that's not what this is about. This is about what kind of people are we? Do we clean up our own mess? Do we leave our children with a problem they cannot solve? I don't think so. I don't think that's our values. I don't think that's the kind of people we are. And to me, that's the essence of this story, is what kind of people are we? And are we going to turn this thing around? Yeah. That's great, Susan. I'm curious. It leads me to think, what would you say are the one or two, obviously you're aware of some of the things that are already happening that are in the right direction, that are good things. It's good that that's happening, and maybe it can happen a little bit faster, a little bit more focused. But what are some of the things that have yet to be really taken on? Like what are the one or two or three sort of biggest, most important things that you see that need to happen in the next, say, 2 to 5 years or 2 to 10 years? I guess I could boil that down to one thing. Okay. There has to be a price on carbon. Yes, exactly. Right now, it is free to dump carbon dioxide into the air, and that's not a reasonable thing. We pay to have our trash picked up. We need to pay to be putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. What some people will call that a carbon tax, I don't really see it that way. Right now, fossil fuels are falsely cheap. They're much cheaper than we actually pay for them. We just don't pay for those costs in what we pay for a kilowatt hour of electricity. So we pay for them in other ways. We pay for them through healthcare costs from people suffering from, diseases from breathing bad air. We pay for them through, more heat waves and people dying in heat waves, heavy downpours that in some places are leading to flooding that are causing enormous damages. We're not paying those costs, and we need to pay them. And so if we got the prices right, then the cost of solar and wind and the other renewable sources of energy would be able to compete much more fairly on a much more level playing field. Yeah. So I think the main thing is to get a price on carbon, to make it no longer free to dump this carbon pollution into the atmosphere. Once that happens, I think everything else falls into place. Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I've been saying is that it's collective insanity to allow for the free or subsidized polluting of the commons. That an individual or corporation, mostly corporations, can get wealthy and benefit personally by, in some way having a negative impact on the rest of us and on the planet is collective insanity. And I love that. I just watched something last week. Bob Inglis said it in the most concise way that I had heard. It's like, wow, what a great way of saying it. He said, what we need to do
is real simple. My message is real simple. He said, and I work with a lot of conservative people, as he does, as you know. He said, we need to put all the price, we need to put all the price in all the fuels, remove all the subsidies, and then watch the free enterprise market solve the climate crisis and the energy crisis. And
absolutely, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the things that goes along with putting a price on carbon and getting the prices right is removing the subsidies.
Yes, exactly.
And then having a more level playing field, because people think that solar and wind are so heavily subsidized. In fact, they're subsidized much less than some of the other sources of power, which don't need the fossil fuels are very mature industries. They certainly don't need any subsidies.
Right.
I also think it's really important for us to start thinking in a more systems approach about this, though, because for the U.S. to be cutting back on our own coal use, but then exporting that coal for use by other countries is not very smart, because the world is round and the carbon, wherever it's emitted, is going to come back to haunt all of us. One half of the boat doesn't float and the other half sink. Yeah. And so we need to cut back on coal burning everywhere. And right now we don't have a way to capture, realistically, cost effectively, with all the engineering worked out, to capture the carbon and store it. I think it's something we need to work on if we want to continue to have coal be part of the system. And, some people are obviously working on that. There are some other problems with coal, though, as we know, mountaintop removal, all kinds of other issues with regard to coal. So until we solve all of those problems, it's maybe something that we need to continue to phase down. So far, the phase down has been largely an economic one, that the cheap natural gas, of course, due to fracking, is now displacing a lot of coal. But we're also really ramping up on wind and solar in this country, and we're doing better on energy efficiency. And those are the things that we should be pushing very hard on.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, Susan, when you wake up on any given day, or you look at, it's been a good weekend and you look at your week, what is it that, you're present to? You are aware of some of the scariest stuff in human history, and yet clearly you're still inspired to be in action, to be of service, to be a contribution, to do the work that you do, and to do it with a sense of not just a commitment, but as I'm sensing just in what I've watched of yours, just this real passion for life, this vitality to be alive and to do this work at this time in history. It's such a holy privilege, to use my sort of religious sort of language. So what is it that inspires you on a daily, weekly basis? Like, where do you find your personal source of inspiration to do the work you do?
I'm a link in the chain. Each of us is a link in the chain. We can't do the whole thing ourselves, right? It's too big. And I may not see the finale, but I'm an important part of the show. And as Martin Luther King said, I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get there. And so that's how I see it. I see myself as a vital link in the chain. I have to do my part so the people who come after me can do their part, and that we can get where we need to go. And that really motivates me. It really drives me to do that part and to do it as well as I possibly can. I think connected to that, it's important to recognize that the reach is as important as the goal, and being part of it is as important as seeing the end point. I guess I'm not, some people fixate or focus on a specific goal, a very specific goal, 350 parts per million, for example. And they say, that's the number, that's the goal. I don't quite see it that way, because I think the number, whatever it is, there's not one number below which we're safe and above which it's dangerous. It's already dangerous. We're already crossed into dangerous territory. We're seeing it all around us. So what do you do if you're driving down the highway and you miss your exit? You get off at the next exit, right?
Exactly.
We are driving down the CO2 highway. We have missed the 350 exit.
Yeah.
Now we're passing by the 400 exit. Maybe we can get off, but maybe we can't. Yeah. So what do? What's the first thing we do? Take your foot off the accelerator, right? Put it on the gas. Put it on the brake.
Right.
Slow down. Get off at the next exit. That's what we have to do.
Yeah.
And we're not doing that. You don't just, so if you miss your exit, you don't just keep speeding off indefinitely on the wrong road. That's what we're doing now. We're speeding down the wrong road. We've got to turn that around. So, I guess I want to say that the number, when I say there's no precise number, it's sort of like cholesterol or blood pressure. The risk just goes up the higher the number gets. You can't say this is the perfect number, and if I'm below that, I'm safe. If I'm above that, I'm going to have a heart attack tomorrow. No, the risk goes up with each bit that the number goes up, and that's the same thing with how many parts per million of CO2 is in the atmosphere or whatever the temperature is. So 2C or 3.5 Fahrenheit, that's not the number. There's no such thing as too late.
Right.
Wherever we end up, we've got to do as much as we can, as fast as we can.
Yeah.
And that's the mantra for me. It's not we have to hit 2C, we have to hit 400. It's as much as we can, as fast as we can. I think that's got to be the goal.
Yeah. Wow. Amen. I mean, one of the things that I appreciated about my conversation with Paul Gilding just last week, I like his vision of a sort of 1 degree war plan. And he talks about that he believes that in the next 2 to 5, 6 years that we are likely to see sort of the dam of denial break. There will be so much compelling, not just evidence, but experience, where as with any dam, when it breaks, the floodwaters are unstoppable. And he sees us as a planet, China, India, European Union, America, everybody mobilized like we were at the beginning of World War II. He says we're slow but not stupid, and I
like to think that's true, and
I think so.
I think the World War II analogy is a good one.
Yeah.
That was a case where it was looking pretty bad, but the world mobilized. We got it together, and pretty much overnight, we shut down domestic car production and started producing planes. And, we did what we had to do. We did everything we had to do, and that's what we need to do now. We really need to turn our attention to this because we are starting to cross some thresholds, and we just saw one recently with part of Antarctica that looks like is now committed to melting eventually.
Right.
That's going to redraw the coastlines of the world, and I don't think we want to cross too many more of those thresholds.
Yes.
The further we go, the harder we push the system, the harder we poke the beast, the more of those thresholds we cross, and the worse things get.
Yes.
And in some cases, it puts us into some vicious cycles that become largely unstoppable. And I just don't want to see us get there.
Yeah.
I want to see us stop just short of as many of those thresholds as we can. We're driving again, we're on a road, and it's foggy, and we don't know right where the edge is. Mm-hmm. And you better be careful when you don't know where the edge is. You want to go slowly. You want to go carefully. Yeah.
Well, I mean, staying with this analogy of, we're going down the freeway and, we're going the wrong direction and we need to get off at an exit. What are some of the institutional and psychological resistances that you see to us getting off the exit and turning around? And then what are some of the things that you have found or experienced or believe to be effective in both meeting or addressing sort of the psychological issues that keep people in denial or whatever, and some of the institutional things where you've got, a well-funded campaign to confuse the issue? So say a little bit about that, if you would. Yeah, so there are vested interests that, like in the tobacco era, that want to keep things the way they are because they're making a lot of money with things being the way they are. But that can't persist. Unfortunately, I think there's been some misunderstanding that we have to choose between the environment and the economy. And that's just ridiculous. Yes, exactly.
It's going to be really good for our economy to invest in the technologies of the future rather than remaining wedded to the technologies of the past. We're seeing it now. Countries like Germany, Denmark, Japan, China that are really taking on renewable energy, their economies are doing well. We even know that, for example, the Northeast states that are part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, in the Northeast, those states' economies are growing faster than all the other 41 states that are not part of a greenhouse gas initiative where they're actually having to limit their emissions. So what is, that one of the things that tells you is that it's actually good for the economy to move into a new energy regime, new energy era. I think this idea that it's environment versus economy is crazy. I think it was Bobby Kennedy who first said, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment,
Yes, amen.
right? Without a healthy, clean environment, you don't have an economy,
Right.
right? The environment does so many things for us. Scientists call them ecosystem services, things that we don't necessarily pay for. We don't pay for, but we don't credit the environment for doing those things for us. But cleaning the air, cleaning the water, keeping us in a stable climate, those are things that the environment does for us essentially for free, that if we had to pay for those services would be enormously expensive. Yes. So this idea, though, that this is about sacrifice and curtailment, I think rubs against the ideology of some people very strongly, and I can understand why. But this is not about that. This is about ingenuity and innovation. Mm-hmm. And I think we all want that. We all believe in American ingenuity and innovation and the fact that we can, collectively do something really positive. And, it's not going to be easy. But, when John Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him safely back home, he said we do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Exactly.
And because it motivates the best of our energies and our intelligence. And I really think that this is another moment just like that. Yeah. And we really need to be mobilized and motivated in that same kind of war footing, whether it's the World War II mm-hmm. model that you mentioned, or the going to the moon model, mm-hmm. or anything else. This is one of those great challenges, perhaps the greatest challenge that humankind has ever faced. Mm-hmm. And I'm convinced that we have what it takes to get motivated and do this and turn it around.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've been in, I don't know how much you know about sort of my background, and Connie and I have been traveling, living all over North America for the last 12 years, essentially evangelizing evolution, evangelizing a deep time understanding of reality, 13.8 billion years of creativity, and doing so in religious settings where I'm really trying to help religious people embrace an ecological evolutionary worldview and embrace evidence as modern day scripture or divine revelation. But in secular settings, I'm trying to focus on, how a purely evidential science-based perspective on reality can actually also nourish us spiritually and emotionally, and so I'm a religious naturalist is the way I sometimes refer to myself. But this sense of the past rooting for us, I mean, that's part of what the title of this conversation series is about, is the future is calling us to greatness. But the first part of that is that the past, this idea, just holding it in my heart, when I imagine countless generations in the past who are rooting, who have sacrificed, and actually, if it weren't for their contribution and their sometimes struggle, I wouldn't even be alive. And so to honor that is to be present and to be of service to my world and to be of service to the future in a way that honors that. And so I want to invite you to share anything that comes up for you around this theme that the past is rooting for us and the future is calling us to greatness.
Mm-hmm. The first thing that comes to my mind is a wonderful line from a poem by Terry Tempest Williams. And she writes, "The eyes of the future are looking back at us and praying for us to see beyond our own time."
Yes.
I feel that really strongly. Every time I look into the eyes of a young child, mm-hmm. I hear that line.
Yes.
I see those eyes of the future. I feel them looking at me. I feel them looking at all of us.
Yes.
And praying for us to see beyond our own time. Because we won't see the worst impacts of climate change. We're seeing some of those impacts now, and we're going to continue to see them throughout our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. But it's really our children and our children's children that are going to see the most severe impacts if we continue down the path we're on. So really the choice is, are they going to look back and say, what in the world were you people thinking? How could you have done this to us? Or are they going to look back with gratitude?
Yes.
And say, thank you. Thank you for thinking about it. Thank you for seeing beyond your own time and for leaving us a beautiful world. And at the same time, making a better world for yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, that poem that you were just quoting, I think the next line is something like that we might act with restraint, that we might leave room for the life that is destined to come, or something like that. I actually use that quote as as a sort of an introduction to a guided meditation that I do in my evening programs, where I then invite people to just sort of center and then to turn in their imagination to the past and allow some ancestor to communicate some words of encouragement, and then I'm just silent for 20, 30 seconds, and then I invite them to thank that being in whatever way is appropriate, and then to imaginatively turn to the future and allow some, either direct descendant if they have kids or grandkids, or just anybody alive 100 years from now or further out, to communicate what would they say that you would find empowering or encouraging or inspiring. But I love that Terry Thomas Williams quote as a sort of an intro to that.
Yeah.
In fact, what I was looking for is my wallet right here. Here I wanted to show this. This is my granddaughter, Isla Renee, and
she's beautiful.
I keep this. She's 3.5 now, and I keep this by my computer because when I think about the future calling me to greatness, one of the things that inspires me to do the work that I do is not just my grandchildren, but all grandchildren. In fact, my great mentor, Thomas Berry, talked about the children and grandchildren of all species. He also used to like to say that the Earth economy is a subset, the human economy is a subset of Earth economy. And the idea that we can have healthy humans in a sick and dying world, or a robust human economy that is an increasing gross national product at a decreasing gross Earth product is just crazy. It's collective insanity.
Right. And Thoreau had that wonderful line, what's the use of a house if you haven't got a decent planet to put it on?
That's a good one. Yeah.
So, people worry about building these beautiful homes, but if the planet's coming down around your ears, it's not good. I think sometimes wealthy people, and I think of all, first worlders basically, think that they'll be largely immune to a lot of the problems. They think that they'll just be rich enough to insulate themselves and isolate themselves. And I think that's a very mistaken notion. And the metaphor that I use for that is, how safe are you if you're in a limousine driving through a ghetto? And I really think that's where the first worlders, will find themselves if we don't do something to turn this around. You don't feel very safe at all, and we will not be safe if the world is full of environmental refugees who are, fleeing fires and floods and sea level rise and the rest. We're already seeing that. I mean, we saw it during Katrina. We saw, a terrible example during Sandy. I come from the Mountain West, where fire, is now sort of a fact of life, and the fire season is just getting longer and more severe, and more acres are being burned, and just the devastation of all these things, insects and fire. It's changing everything. It's changing so much about how we live, and I just don't think that the world's going to be a very safe place until we start to turn this around.
I agree. In fact, I'm realizing I think I interrupted you or didn't let you complete the thought around both the institutional and the sort of individual psychological resistance, and then what if anything you have to share in terms of how to turn that around, or what you see as most likely to be effective in moving that forward.
Yeah, so there's a lot of psychological resistance. I think some of it comes from the fear of what it means if we accept this. So, let's start just with basically accepting that we're changing the climate. For most of human history, we've thought about weather and climate as the province of God. We still call disasters that take place acts of God. It's very difficult for us to believe and accept that we could be doing this. But once you understand the science, once you understand that we've increased this heat-trapping gas, carbon dioxide, in its concentration in the atmosphere by 40% in a very rapid time period. So in the geological blink of an eye, we've dug up billions of years of carbon and are releasing it to the atmosphere in a matter of a century. That once you understand that, once you understand how that works in the atmosphere to trap heat, then you understand how it is that us, this seemingly small presence on the planet, could be altering the entire planet's climate system, and in fact are. And we have lots of ways of knowing and understanding that. People don't always know that. They think that maybe we're guessing. that suddenly it started warming and we started to say, wonder why? Maybe it's us. It's not like that at all. In fact, we've known for like 150 years that this would happen. Back to the time of Tyndall and Arrhenius, there are some scientists that were looking at this hundreds of years ago. And they speculated that if we burned a lot of these fossil fuels, this coal and oil, that we would release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, it would heat up the world. And they actually even got the numbers right. They really said it's going to be somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees Celsius. They got it, and they were right. And of course, we've refined that over time. But so this was predicted, and then it happened. And I think some people don't know that history.
That's
and
great.
It's really very important to understanding this.
I got it. Yep.
Also, when people think they say, well, how do you know it's us? Well, we have lots of ways of knowing it's us. One way we have of knowing it, they say, how do you know it's not the sun? I bet it's the sun. I say, well, we measure the sun. We measure the energy coming out of the sun. It's an 11-year solar cycle. There's no trend. Over the last 50 years, when global average temperature has gone up, there's been no trend in the energy reaching Earth from the sun.
Yep.
So it can't be the sun. We know that. Another way we know that is, if it were the sun, you would see warming through all the layers of the atmosphere. You'd see warming at the surface. You'd see warming in the troposphere, just above the surface. You'd see warming in the stratosphere above that. That's not what we see. We see warming at the surface and in the troposphere. We see cooling in the stratosphere.
Wow.
Could not happen if it was coming from the sun.
Yeah.
It could happen. It does happen because we're trapping heat in the troposphere. And actually, the stratosphere is cooling. So it's another way we have of knowing for sure what's causing this. People don't know that. We also use climate models. And a beautiful thing about climate models is not only can we use them to project the future, we can use them to understand the past, understand what's already happened. Because on the real Earth, you can't isolate different factors. It's all just happening. But in a model, you can isolate the factors. You can put in solar, you can put in volcanoes, you can put in the human contribution of heat-trapping gases from burning fossil fuels, agriculture, and other things. When we do that, and we take the model, and we take out the human influence, and just leave in all the natural stuff, what the sun's been doing, what volcanoes have been doing, we actually see that climate would have slightly cooled over the last 50 years. Only when you put in the human thing, the human addition to this, do you see the warming that we've seen. And so sometimes when you think about that and people say, well, how much, what percentage of what we've seen is us? The real answer is more than 100%, because it would have been cooling if not for our influence. So it's actually more than 100%. It's by far the dominant cause.
Yeah, that's great.
So we have all these ways of knowing. I think people don't know that. They think it's a guess. And when they talk, I sometimes worry about some of the language we use. We say consensus. It's a consensus among scientists. And that sounds like it might be opinion. It's not opinion. It's a consensus based on evidence. Based on the evidence, the vast majority, more than 97% of active scientific researchers that study climate have concluded that human-induced climate change is occurring now. That's the truth. It's just a fact. And people struggle to accept it. But it's evidence-based. It's not a question of belief. When people say, do you believe in global warming? It always rubs me wrong because it's not a belief system. It's evidence-based.
Yes.
We measure it. We don't believe it. We measure it. And we know it. It's a fact.
Yeah, as an evidential mystic and as an evangelist for science, at one time somebody criticized, they thought they were criticizing me. I took it as a great compliment. Said that Michael Dowd is like a cross between Carl Sagan and a Pentecostal preacher. And this sort of the gospel according to evidence is one of the things that I'm sort of trying to communicate. So I love the way you just articulated that. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that there are the people struggle to accept this. They don't want to believe it. It makes them feel guilty. But I don't say it's our fault. I say it's our responsibility.
Amen. Yeah.
We caused it. We're responsible for it. And so what do people like us do? We clean up our mess. We take responsibility for what we caused and we turn it around. It's not about fault. It's not about blame. It's simply about responsibility.
Yeah, that's great. I love the way you keep coming back, and that's one of the things I liked about the various videos and stuff that I've watched of yours. It's like there's a way of taking a square look at the bad news and the challenging stuff, and without sugarcoating any of that, but finding metaphors and analogies and language that's tight, that's memorable, and that has people sort of naturally want to move in the right direction. In fact, you've already shared a number of them, but any other particularly potent or helpful metaphors, sound bites, like the language that you found that's been particularly useful, that you'd be willing to share with those of us who are sort of at that place of trying to articulate our own sort of core storyline or our own core way of speaking about this to people?
Yeah. So I've talked about the road a lot, and the road we're on, and I think one way of thinking about this is that we're standing at a fork in the road right now. We can choose our future. The future lies in our hands. Do we choose a future that has a little more climate change, or a future with a lot more climate change and a lot more impacts and really a devastating future? The good news is that if we choose the lower emissions future, there are so many other great benefits to our health, to our happiness, to our economy. And, there's a set of great reasons to do this. Mm-hmm. So I think the fork in the road is a powerful way to think about this. Yep. Because I do think we have to remember that it lies in our hands. I think that I don't like when people talk about the inevitability of future climate change. Sure, there is a certain amount of warming that we are committed to, and we have to admit that, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But beyond that little bit that we're committed to, it's in our hands which way we go. So I just think that's an important way of looking at it. Also, speaking of the road, colleague Chris Field out of Stanford said something I thought was really effective. He said, by putting off this decision, by not doing something now, it's like kicking the can down the road. But with each kick, the can gets heavier and harder to kick.
Oh, interesting. I like that.
So I think that's a very powerful metaphor. Mm-hmm. We kick that can, and now our kids have a bigger, heavier can to kick, and their kids will have an even bigger, even heavier one. It will be really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And we eventually will leave them with a problem that cannot be solved, that gets into so many runaway feedbacks that there's little that can be done. So the sooner we act, the better. Also, the sooner we act, the cheaper it will be. Mm-hmm. We want to solve this problem, but we want to solve it as efficiently and effectively as possible, right? We don't want to spend more than we have to. Mm-hmm. The way to do that is to start immediately, because there's only a certain amount we can emit, and the longer we wait, the sharper that reduction path will have to be. So here's another metaphor. If you think about like a ski mountain. Okay. So if we start now, we can glide down on the bunny slope. If we wait too long, we are going to be facing a double black diamond that is a straight down path, and it is going to be hard. It's going to be tough. It's going to be hard on the economy, and there's going to be casualties. There's just no question about it. So I'd like to see us take the nice, easy glide. The only problem with that metaphor is some people really like those double black diamonds. Sometimes people have trouble understanding how it is that climate change is affecting our daily weather and some of the weather events that we're seeing. And they say, well, how can you blame it's like you're blaming climate change for everything, for a flood or for a drought. And I say, it's kind of carbon dioxide, adding these heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere is like putting the climate on steroids. Mm-hmm. What it does is it makes for more of certain types of extreme weather events, and it makes them stronger and it makes them more frequent. So just like a baseball player, when he wasn't on steroids, he still hit home runs. But now with the steroids, he's hitting more home runs. He's hitting them farther, and he's hitting them longer. We're seeing balls that are going way outside the ballpark like we never saw before. And that's what we're seeing with the climate system on carbon dioxide. The weather is on steroids now, and we're seeing more of those events. So it's not that you're blaming, just like you couldn't blame a particular home run on the steroids. What you can blame is the trend. Right, exactly. And so what we're seeing now is a trend towards more extreme heat, more heavy downpours, and those things are happening because of climate change. So it's the weather on steroids. A similar metaphor is to say we're loading the dice. By loading the atmosphere with these heat-trapping gases, it's like loading the dice towards more rolls of extreme weather. If the extreme weather is double sixes, more rolls of double sixes like loaded dice. Yeah. So There are a whole bunch of things that we can think about as ways to help people understand. I think there's a whole set of medical metaphors that are very useful. I started off earlier by saying that there's no blood pressure number or cholesterol number below which you're safe and above which, it's dangerous. And so that's similar with climate change. Also, if you go to your doctor and she says, I don't like your numbers, I don't like your heart condition, I think you should get some more exercise and watch what you eat. Do you say to her, exactly when am I going to have a heart attack and exactly how bad is it going to be? No. You follow the advice and you do it. So by the same token, for people to say to climate scientists exactly what's going to happen and exactly how bad and exactly when, no. We know the general picture. We don't have every detail. We don't have some of the regional details. That's harder for the climate models. But we're already seeing a lot of the things that have been predicted. And in fact, one of the things we're seeing is that the predictions have in many ways been underestimates, because the scientists have been conservative in their estimates. And so we're seeing sea level rise faster than we expected it. We're seeing an increase in hurricane intensity in the Atlantic earlier than we really expected to see it. Many of the things we're seeing are beyond what we expected at this stage. Greenland and Antarctica melting faster than anyone expected them to. So I think it would be incorrect. Oh, and if you look at Arctic sea ice, when I was working on the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment, we were saying that, later this century, we would probably see an ice-free Arctic in summer, somewhere around 2080 or 2090. Now it looks like it's right around the corner. Right. It may be within a decade that we see an ice-free Arctic in summer. And that has tremendous implications, not only in the Arctic, but for the whole planet's climate system. So, I would say when people say, oh, those climate scientists, they're just alarmists. The first thing I think is, first of all, you don't know any climate scientists if you think that, because they are not, the last thing they are is alarmist. Exactly. The information is alarming. It's alarming, exactly. But there's a difference. An alarmist is someone who's unnecessarily alarming people, right? Shouting fire in the theater if there's no fire. But if there is a fire, you need to alert people to the fire. Yeah. But my job is to say, how do we alert people to the fire in the most effective way, right? We don't want them to stampede. Right. We don't want them to freak out and pull the covers over their head and want to just get a bigger SUV to protect their family. We want people to respond in a way that's effective. So that's the challenge we face. Yeah. How do we let people know there's a fire in a way that's credible, calm, yet expresses the urgency, because there is an urgency to this. Yeah. This is not like steel tariffs. If we don't get it done this year, we can get it done next year. There's an urgency to this. We have to get it done. We've got to do as much as we can, as fast as we can. That's the way it's going to be less expensive. And when I say less expensive, I don't only mean in dollars. Yes, exactly. I mean in human lives and in species lost and in all the things that we care about. So we need to get on this. There is a real urgency. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how do we communicate that? That's the challenge we face. And it's what keeps me going. It's what gets me going every day. How do I communicate this better? How do I help my colleagues communicate this better and more effectively? We need people to understand it. Yeah. It's essential that they understand it. Yeah. Our future depends on it.
Amen. Wow. I'm just loving this. There's two populations that I found that aren't in action. For very different reasons. One would be perhaps the myth of perpetual progress. That if everything's going to keep getting better and better, there's no need for me to be in action. Things are going to keep getting, technology. Look at the last 100 years. I mean, hey, And then the other is sort of the myth of the apocalypse. If the end of the world is right around the corner, then why need to be in action? Let's just, be hospice workers for each other and that sort of thing. What do you say to those two groups of people?
That's a hard question. For the ones who have given up, for the ones who have gone right to despair, I say it's just not true. Things can get a lot worse, but they can also get a lot better. There is no such thing as too late in this game. We have to do everything we can. Because, we're talking about a world that's, we've seen 1 degree, 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit of warming, and look at the changes we're seeing already. Can you imagine 5? Yeah. Can you imagine 10? Can you imagine 20? we are on a course for passing 1,000 parts per million. We are on a course for a devastating future. We cannot go there. We've got to turn this thing around. Yeah. The sooner the better, the lower the level, the better, as much as we can, as fast as we can. That's the mantra. Yeah. So I don't like when I hear the defeatist, that we're screwed attitude. I just don't, I just can't buy it. I just know it's not true. For those who think things are going to keep getting better, I would ask them to simply look at the evidence of what we're seeing right now. We are observing climate change and we are observing negative impacts. And it's not that we had the perfect climate before. There's it's like, oh, there's some perfect number. No, what it is we've had a very stable climate and we've designed our society for that stable climate. We've built our cities on the coasts. We've designed our dams and pumps and pipes and canals for the climate that we've had. Any change to that climate is going to be costly and difficult, yes, and for us to adapt to and deal with. So it's not that it was perfect, but it was what we knew and it was what we had, and we've designed everything for that. Sea level rises 6 feet or whatever whatever we're going to see in this century. We've been saying 1 to 4. We're now thinking it's probably at the high end because of what we're witnessing just recently. 4 feet of sea level rise makes a big difference for cities like New Orleans, Miami, Norfolk, Virginia, Boston, New York, London. So these are serious.
Yeah.
So we are not going to be able, things are not just going to get better, not when they already have water in the streets of Miami at high tide and they're already spending $300 million trying to deal with that, but it's a losing battle.
Right, exactly.
Because it's limestone around there. You cannot build enough seawalls. You cannot do enough to keep that seawater out. It's already infiltrating into wells and contaminating fresh water with salt water. We're seeing some pretty devastating things already. 95%
of my family, virtually all of my family, lives in Miami and Key Largo. So I'm well aware of the challenges that Miami faces over the course of the coming decades.
It's not going to be pretty down there, and at some point we're going to have to do some thinking about what places we start to back away from. Rather than continually rebuilding in places that continually get flooded, whether they're on the coasts or in river flood zones, I think we just have to get a little bit smarter about some of that.
Yeah. Well, there's just 2 last questions I'd like to ask. One is, what would you say to a young person who is sort of waking up to the challenges of this, maybe a teenager or 20-something? So that's one question. And the second one is a practical question for those of us who get climate change and get these challenges and who want to sort of put our shoulder to the wheel and want to do something. What would be the thing that you would most recommend? Somebody who, we can all change light bulbs and drive less and fly less and all that. That's great. That's good. But how can any one of us or any small group of us, say a church, help further this movement to put a price on carbon? How can we learn more about that and then sort of engage in that issue so that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, when we've actually done that, we can look a young person in the eye and say, yeah, I helped make that happen or whatever.
Yeah. So I think there's a tremendous amount that can be done at the local level, the local, state, and regional levels. And we're seeing that happening around the country. So together and say, how can we reduce our emissions as a community? We have cities, hundreds of cities across the U.S. that have signed commitments to do just that. We have mayors for climate protection. We have cities doing great things. Get involved in your city. Get involved in reducing emissions, because you can't put a price on carbon in your city, right? This is a national and possibly an international issue, but you can do things to reduce your emissions. And that's what matters to the atmosphere, is how much are the emissions. So the more we can cut, the better. People started doing that in cities, and then states got together and started doing it, and then these 9 northeastern states got together and made this regional greenhouse gas initiative. So they're doing it, and that's happening around the country. That can happen in many places. Each of these is a laboratory for things that can then take place at the national level. So let's get these things in place, then we can expand them. Let's start all those laboratories. What you do in your home, what you do in your church, what you do in your community. Maybe your church wants to have a competition with the next church to see who can cut their emissions more. Make it fun. schools can compete for this. Nancy Jackson is doing this in Kansas with the Climate and Energy Project, where schools compete against each other, and they make it fun.
That's great, yeah.
And she says, you know what? In Kansas, there are a lot of people who don't accept the reality of human-induced climate change. But she said, it doesn't matter. The atmosphere doesn't care if you believe it or not. What it cares is, what are the emissions? And if we can cut the emissions, that's what matters.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's do that. And it's not only about cutting emissions, because that's one piece of it, is reducing future climate change. Another piece of it is dealing with, becoming more resilient to and more prepared for the climate change we're already dealing with.
Yep.
And there's so much that can be done and is being done at the local level, because that's really where these things take place. And so work on those things, work with your community to do those things so that we'll be more prepared for the things that are coming our way. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, John Holdren, the president's science advisor, says, there are 3 things we're going to have to do. Mitigate, that is reduce the amount of climate change. Adapt, that is become more prepared. And the third one is suffer. And the 3 pieces of the pie, they're movable. The more we mitigate and reduce, the less we'll have to adapt and the less we'll suffer. Yeah. And the less we mitigate, the more we'll have to adapt and the more we'll suffer. So all those pieces are movable. Let's make that mitigation piece, the piece where we're reducing emissions, the biggest piece.
Yeah.
And then we'll reduce the cost of adaptation and we'll reduce the amount of suffering.
Yeah.
So those are things we can all do. We can do them in our homes, in our communities, in our states, and we can keep working up the levels, right, till we get a great national plan. And I believe, and the president believes, that when the U.S. takes the lead, the rest of the world will follow.
Yeah, amen. Yep, that's great.
I mean, we've been the largest emitter for a long time. Mm-hmm. China has just surpassed us on a year-to-year basis, but just for the last couple of years. But cumulatively, we still have and cumulative is what matters, because carbon dioxide stays up there for a long time. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we've just got to get on it as much as we can, as fast as we can.
Yeah, amen. And to a young person?
So I would like to see young people really throw themselves into this. This is about their future. Mm-hmm. And, there's so much that they can do in their own communities. Think about where kids get things started. They take them home to their parents and they spread throughout the communities. I mean, that's how recycling got going. Kids came home and told their parents, we're going to do this. We're going to sort this stuff, and this is how it's going to work. Kids can learn about this, and they can tell their parents, this is about my future. Let's, help me. Let's get this going. There's a leadership role that kids can take, that young people can take. And just thinking about their career choices. I mean, we need some serious movement on the energy front. We need to see all the forms of renewable energy get more efficient and less expensive. We're already seeing that, but we can do more. I mean, the price of solar cells has come down hugely. The amount of wind power and solar power are going up enormously, but we need more. And we need other sources of renewable energy. And there are so many things that are being worked on now. I'd love to see young people get involved in those kinds of activities, thinking about the future and how they can make it better and what contribution they can make to, electric cars, and then ways to power those cars with renewable energy, for example.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Susan, if somebody wants to know, if they just got totally turned on by this conversation and just really want to explore your work more deeply, where would be the best place or places to go?
Well, I'd send them to my website. It's climatecommunication.org. There we have lots of resources posted. People can read about climate change, the basic science. They can find articles and reports. They can see videos. What we've done is taken some of the really important graphics in climate change, and we've animated them and narrated them. So we kind of give you a guided tour through some of these graphics, explaining what you're seeing and why it matters. So there's all kinds of great stuff there, and I think that's where I'd recommend that they go. And that website also points you to other good websites to explore more.
That's fabulous. Yeah, I've spent some time there, and I'm motivated to do even more now as a result of this.
Great.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for being part of this series, for the work that you're doing, and I'm just thrilled to have made this connection and had this opportunity to have a conversation with you about this.
Thanks. It's been fun to talk with you. I'll look forward to hearing about the series as it goes forward.
Yeah, thanks.